Creativity is not a gift. It's a learned skill. It can solve problems, make money, and even save lives. Our speaker was trained, yes, trained from an early age to think about problems and find solutions where others were not even looking. Our speaker tonight is a qualified speaker in District 100, our neighboring district to the west. Dr. Michael Alexander will discuss his approach to free-range thinking. Change the focus, find the solution. Join me in welcoming qualified speaker from District 100, Dr. Michael Alexander.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I've been invited to do a scuba dive off of an oil rig. This is a tremendous compliment because a dive off of an oil rig is a very complicated dive. Very beautiful, but very complicated. We had descended, checked with each other to make sure everyone knew what everyone was, and descended again until we reached 90 feet below the surface. We checked, everyone's there, everyone's position, everybody was ready, and began a descent, except for me. I looked downward, and I got vertigo. The whole rig started to spin faster than was physically possible, and I couldn't tell which way was up or which way was down. Now, what does a scuba diver do in a situation like this? They die. They either go off in the wrong direction, downward, thinking it's up, until they run out of air, or panicking, they shoot upward so fast that as the air in their lungs expands from the decreased water pressure around them, their lungs explode. But my daddy didn't raise me to die that easily. And so I stopped for a second and said, I don't know which way is up, but the bubbles know. And so I followed the bubbles upward. The slowest bubbles, so that my lungs had time to adjust, so that the pressure did not build up, and I reached the surface. I could have died, but instead of focusing on what I didn't know, I focused on what I did. I changed the focus. I found the solution. Now, some of you are wondering, well, he mentioned his dad. Is he just being folksy? Let me tell you a story about my dad. When my father was in college, he was on the swim team. And at one party, the head of the wrestling team, the state wrestling champion, known as Moose, started to tease my father mercilessly. After all, swimming wasn't a real sport. Wrestling was a real sport. And my father couldn't possibly, but he challenged my father's manhood. And my father suddenly smiled and said, okay, Moose, I'll take you on. Everyone at the party panicked. This is Moose. He's the state wrestling champion. Ray, he'll kill you. My father said, I got this one. And so they went together to the gym. And when they reached the gym, my father headed off, and Moose said, where are you going? The wrestling match are this way. And my father said, oh no, your sport, my turf. We're going to the pool. Well, like any wrestler, in order to get his weight class down, Moose had starved every ounce of fat off of his body. He had no buoyancy. He got in the water, and instead of being a threat to my father, he was quickly drowning and begging my father to save his life. My father realized, your sport, my turf. And so instead of wrestling the normal way, he changed the focus. And he found the solution that kept him alive. Now, there's one story that you're probably almost all familiar with, and that is the story of David and Goliath. But let me make sure that you understand it the way it really happened. The Hebrew army and the Philistine army met on the plains, and it was obvious there would be a great slaughter. And it was common in these days. They decided to each send forth a champion, and whoever's champion won would be the one who won the battle. The Philistines sent forth a giant, Goliath, 7 feet tall, huge muscles, a sword reach which was just overwhelming. And the Hebrew army panicked. No one could stand up to him. No one had his reach. No one had his strength. And they didn't know what to do until a young shepherd boy stepped forward by the name of David. And David said, I will win this battle. Well, they were all very relieved to not be the ones facing Goliath, but they were also all scared for David. He couldn't match Goliath's reach. He didn't have Goliath's strength. And they offered him the best armor the Hebrews had. And he said, no, that will only slow me down. As they watched, panic-stricken, David stepped onto the plain. And then he brought out the sling that he had used many times to slay wolves. And he started spinning that sling over his head faster and faster and faster. And he let loose. The rock from that sling hit Goliath in the forehead with the force of a .45 caliber bullet, long outside of the reach of Goliath's sword. Now, those of you who are religious will say David won because he had the Lord's favor. And I'm sure it helped. David won because Goliath brought a knife to a gunfight. David didn't look at the reach or the muscles where everyone else looked. He looked for the vulnerable spot, and he said, how can I get to that? Another story about my father. My father was the inventor of the barcode. Now, some of you may try to look this up later on Wikipedia. They have the story wrong. Let me tell you the true story. I was there. My father went to lunch with one of his buddies, Frank Stites, and he said, so Frank, what are you working on? And Frank said, well, in order to identify whose railroad cars are on whose tracks, and they charge a rental fee, they have numbers on the side of the rail cars. And reading those numbers is a union job. So it goes to people who are kind of old and squinty-eyed, who get the numbers backwards, and it messes up all of the accounting. So we've been hired on a competitive bid to find another way. What I've done is I've got a series of colored strips. You can see them behind me. And when the train goes by, a little reader will read the strips and tell them the numbers. Simple, right? My father said, so what's the problem? Frank Stites said, the trains go by too fast. The strips blur. We can't tell one number from another. We've tried everything. We've tried to fix the software. We've tried faster readers and scanners. We've done everything. It's not a problem we can solve. And my father simply sat back for a second and smiled and said, here's your solution. Rotate the strips. Then, instead of waiting for the train to go by, use a scanner and read down at your own pace. Well, that solved the problem. Frank Stites had tried to concentrate on the problem of making a faster reader. He'd stuck there. But my father said, let's change the problem. Let's look at a different angle. And that, my friends, led to the invention of the barcode. Now, as I said, don't look it up on Wikipedia. They've got it wrong. And there are a lot of people who want to tell you that they invented the barcode, and they will change Wikipedia faster than I can give them the truth. I'm not going to concentrate on giving Wikipedia a change they won't get. That'd be stuck in a single solution that doesn't work. So instead, when people ask me about the barcode, I say, look up the barcode on Google and Raymond Alexander, and then you will find the truth. Again, I changed the problem. I changed the solution. And that's what works. Now, let me, if you're ready, let's talk about practical examples of how you can do something similar. But before I do, you know, they tried to figure out how intelligent chimpanzees are. And so they gave them some puzzles to try to work out. They hung a series of bananas up on a branch out of the monkey's reach and gave him a series of blocks to set up, one on top of the other, like steps so they could climb up. And they said, this will tell us if the chimpanzee is capable of complex thinking. You know what the chimpanzee did? He went over, grabbed the researcher by the hand, pulled him over to the bananas, climbed up the researcher, and grabbed the bananas that way. He never touched the boxes. They had another experiment where they put the chimpanzee, and chimpanzees can't swim, on a raft. Now the chimpanzee knew that water would put out a fire. So they put a bucket on the raft next to the water and lit a small fire to see how the chimpanzee would handle this disaster. The chimpanzee decided to do the only logical thing. He urinated on the fire. The researchers didn't think as broadly as the animal. Now, let me give you an example for you to work from. It's a relatively straightforward one, and some of you will have heard it, but I want you to think about it and think about how the solution fits into what I'm talking about. A truck got stuck under a bridge, and it wedges itself under that bridge when that happens. You cannot back out. You cannot go forward. You're stuck. And whatever solutions people try to come up with, and they come up with these things, you can't lift the bridge. That just doesn't happen. Cutting the top off the truck is a long, slow, and dangerous process. So what do? Well, if you're staring here at this problem, you're still looking in the wrong place. What's keeping that truck wedged up there? The air in the tires. Let the air out of the tires, and the truck can back right out. This is not an invention of my own, by the way, my friends. I have a friend who does truck driving for a living, and he says it's a common solution to that problem. Okay, one more. In a small European village, there was, well, I've got to be honest with you, there was a philanderer. And the philanderer had had an affair with almost every single woman in the village. And the village husbands were livid. They hated this man. They wanted him gone. And so they charged him with a capital crime. the crime of adultery. Now, this village had a very simple rule. If anyone was charged with a capital crime, they were given a 50-50 chance. There would be 2 slips of paper put into a hat, and one slip would say, hang him, and the other would say, freedom. Needless to say, the concept that there was a 50-50 chance that this gentleman was going to escape death and continue to have affairs with the women in the town was not acceptable. So they came up with a simple solution. They wrote death on both of the slips of paper. But of course, as Mark Twain put it, 3 men can keep a secret if 2 of them are dead. And one of them just had to brag to his wife that her lover was going to be gone forever. They were going to get rid of him. Well, she loved her lover. And she went running to him in his jail cell. And she said, both slips of paper say death. They're going to kill you. And he leaned back and he smiled. And she said, did you hear what I said? He said, you've given me everything I need. Thank you. But go back to your husband and relax. And the day came. And they gave him the hat. And he pulled forth his slip of paper. Wait a minute. Are you guys looking at this slip of paper? Why? You know what this slip of paper says. It says death. That's not what he wants you to think about. And the men panicked. They said, wait a minute. What did it say? He said, I don't know. But it's the opposite of what's left in the hat. So my friends, I want you, whenever you're faced with a problem, to change the focus. That's where you'll find the solution. Don't forget that if you don't know which way is up, maybe the bubbles do. Don't think about playing a game on someone else's turf. Change it to your own. Learn to climb researchers, not build precarious mountains of boxes. Learn to find other ways to put out fires. Oh, I know the censors were wondering if I do what I do there. And don't look at the top where the problem is. Look where the tires are. And no matter how desperate things look, no matter how much the sign may say death on both the slips of paper, there's another way to set the judgment to your satisfaction. Remember what isn't there. Freeing yourself, freeing your thinking to shift the focus and find the solution. And that will solve many problems, save lives, make money, or even let you live and love another day. Mr. Toastmaster.